Hello, this is Fortify, and this is the patch breakdown for the changes between the Breach Wanderer's current live version, which is, or I suppose previous live version, which is 4636, and the new version, which is 5100. So you can see I have a summary on the right-hand side that goes over everything I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about all of the changes because there's too much, and this video is already going to be fairly long. So let's get into it. So first up, the new version has new UI. You will see the new UI on pretty much every screen, including right from when you press play game. Here in town, we now have some fancy borders around all the different names of the places. The start run button is now on a pedestal and has a fancy button. At the top, you can see these collection and open pack buttons, which are now pink colored and have this beveled border around them that you'll see on pretty much all of the buttons now. And I have a couple more screenshots of the new UI. Here's the forge where we have a friendly gentleman who will help you with crafting whatever upgrades you want. And also in the market, there's an odd homunculus man person thing that will sell you all of the usual market amenities. So this is a screenshot of the deck builder, which there are a few features that I want to point out while we're here. The first thing is that you'll notice there's now, in addition to the swanky new UI on the cards, at the top of the border of the card, there is a border that changes depending on what type the card is. You can see, for example, that Cursed Bolt has this blue and purple appearance, while the skills have this sort of metal hammered thing around the top, along with a different banner style drop down for their cost. You can see that also when you're looking at the card at your deck on the right side, you can now see more easily at a glance what type each card is, because the Void Bolt still has this different mana colored this different colored mana orb, while the Treasure Hunt and the other skills have these pennants. And Frost Strike, being a strike, has yet another different appearance. So that is just a quick look at the new UI. There is new UI basically everywhere. There are also new visual effects, which if I press this button, I believe you should now be seeing an animation of what Singularity looks like now. So that's cool. So that's the new UI. The next thing we're going to talk about is the new character, the Paladin. So I'm not going to get into details of how the Paladin plays, but they are, I'm unclear on the pronouns, a robot that has a big shield and charges up with energy, and then once you have enough energy, you can supercharge. And when supercharged, you do extra damage, and any shield that you would gain is instead applied as shock to a random enemy. So that's a lot of fun. I will have a video up probably some point within a week or so of this video going up, talking a bit about Paladin and how Paladin works, and how Paladin's cards work. And then later I hope to have a more advanced guide to Paladin strategies, because as you can see in this screenshot, I have quite a few different Paladin decks. Silan also changed slightly. Silan's level 4 passive, which used to create a health potion and a flash bomb and shuffle them into your deck at the start of the fight. Now, at the start of the fight and every time that you shuffle your deck, you will just create a health potion or flash bomb, which will go straight to your hand. And these are now temporary, so if you don't use it, you lose it. And if you can shuffle your deck repeatedly, perhaps because you played something that was draw a treasure and your only treasure was in your discard pile, then you will be able to get them even more quickly instead of having to wait to get through your whole deck. And the reason that this change happened is because the old version was very good on depth 1 and 2, but as you start getting into the late game, it was kind of a downside to have these sort of weaker cards put into your deck. And so now they're not taking up draws, it is all upside. Sometimes you get free mana, sometimes you get free ability to throw out weak. Those are both good things. And at level 10, you now have a new passive that uses the same fully block mechanic that the Paladin has. And the way that works is if you get hit by an enemy and you have enough shields to prevent that damage from actually damaging your health, then you will have fully blocked that attack. And you will get a Cannon Blast if you're level 10 and you're playing Silan. And then if it did, for example, 10 damage and you had exactly 10 shield, then you will upgrade the Cannon Blast. You'll get a Cannon Blast Plus. And so This is a really cool change. Sloan's old level 10 passive is now actually used on the Paladin because the Paladin has a shield theme. So your cards deal 1% more damage and apply 1% more status for every shield that you have. Makes perfect sense for our shieldy Paladin. There are also 18 new generic cards, and these are just 3 of the new cards. I'm not going to go over all the new cards in detail here. Again, probably I will have another video. Let's say probably one video just talking about the new cards, both the new generic cards and the new monster cards that go with the monsters I'm going to talk about next. And then another video talking about the changes to existing cards, because something like 150 cards that already exist were changed. So it's a lot to talk about. I'm not going to fit into one video, even a dedicated video. So get to that one later. There are also 3 new enemies. Real quick, these are all in depth 3. The Bog Golem and the Shadowbone Shell both appear as normal enemies. Bog Golem in particular is very nasty, though. It is far more dangerous than I would say a regular normal enemy would be. I would strongly advise exercising caution if you see a Bog Golem in your path. Shadowflame Scouts are elites, and they are, honestly, in my opinion, not that difficult. But you can try them out for yourself and see what you think. So each of these monsters has 2 new cards, of course, because new monsters means new cards. So if you defeat them, you can see what those cards are, or if you have the either Spyglass at tier 2 from your forge, then whenever you encounter them, you will just very quickly be able to see what cards they have before you even get into the fight. So, new mechanics. Fortify. The Shadowbone Shells use this new Fortify buff, and whenever you gain a rank of Fatigue, all of the enemies with Fortify will get 1 shield for each rank of Fortify they have. And I believe the snails come in with like 10 ranks of Fortify. And then, so you draw 6 cards beyond the initial 5 you get for the turn, and boom, snail gets plus 10 shield. If you get more Fatigue, snails get more shield. Yeah. They will lose 1 rank of Fortify at the start of their turn, and Fortify can be dispelled, but it will take you. You're very unlikely to get through all of it. Most likely, you will just accidentally end up giving the snail a pretty good amount of shield over the course of the fight if you're not careful. The other new mechanic, Opportunist. So Opportunist is a new buff that is used by Shadowbone Prowlers. So Shadowbone Prowlers are not a new enemy, but this is a new buff, and they will start with a rank of Opportunist when you come into the fight. While the enemy has at least 1 rank of Opportunist, multiple ranks don't do anything, but as long as they have at least 1, they will trigger their action whenever you gain a rank of Fatigue, and they will also change what their action is to do something else. So if you draw 6 cards on turn 1, you are absolutely getting attacked by the Prowlers, and there's a very good chance that between the attack they just did to you and whatever they changed to, that they're going to set up Opportunist again for next turn. You cannot dispel Opportunist. Arcane will not save you here. And 1 rank of Opportunist is lost at the start of the owner's turn, so you just have to wait it out. Triggering the enemy's action does not cause debuffs on them to tick. They won't take curse damage from attacking you, they won't take poison damage, and they won't lose that stack of Opportunists that you want to go away. So be very careful about drawing too many cards while fighting a Prowler. Other new mechanics. This one, though, is upside for the players. The last 2 were not. So this is the Allied Summon slot. So a lot of people have requested this. Previously, when you were playing a summoning deck, you would have this problem where you'd enter a fight like the one you can see in the screenshot, where the Munchrooms take up 2 slots, Demented Munchroom takes up 2 slots. That's 4 enemy slots taken up, no room for a summon. But now, our adventurers have learned how to stand a little bit further back, which means that they have space to summon in 1 ally, even if the board is full. So enemies cannot show up in this spot, if you're fighting Silgas, you can't find yourself fighting 5 Silgas. There's still only 4 spots that enemies can show up in. And if the spot is empty, allies can show up in enemy spots too, but this spot is safe. Allies in this spot can't be summoned over. They can still be killed, but they cannot be summoned over, and this spot will never be blocked. So you can now play ally decks and be safe in the knowledge that you'll always be able to summon something. So, mechanics that changed. Cleanse. So, I don't have a image here. I had a tooltip, but it was out of date. So each cleanse trigger now removes 25% of ranks instead of just 1. The 25% is rounded normally, but it is down to a minimum of 1. So for example, if you have 1 rank of a debuff and you cleanse 1 time, 25% of 1 is only 0.25. That should round down to 0, but cleanse is minimum 1, so 1 rank of debuff and cleanse 1 time, you'll lose that rank of that debuff is gone. Unless it's shocked, which can't be cleansed. If you have 5 ranks of a debuff and you cleanse 1 time, you will lose 5 times 0.25 equals 1.25 ranks, which rounds down to 1. So even at 5 ranks of a debuff, this is still not going to change the old behavior. You're going to have 4 ranks of the debuff after you've cleansed once. But if you have 6 ranks of a debuff and you cleanse 1 time, you're going to lose 1.5 ranks, which is going to round up to 2. And afterwards, you're going to have 4 ranks of the debuff left. So 6 is kind of the magic number there. And then for every 4 ranks beyond that. So at 10 ranks, you'll lose 3. At 14 ranks, you'll lose 4, and so on. And if you cleanse multiple times, it'll be based on how much was left over. So if you are at 6 and you have something that says cleanse yourself twice, you'll go from 6 to 4, and then from 4 to 3. So that's how that works. Another change, evasion. So this evasion itself still works the same way. However, most cards that grant evasion now instead grant temporary evasion. Temporary evasion, it works like any other temporary bonus. For example, if you get powerful this turn, it works the same way. And that means that if you don't use the evasion, it's lost. So you play Sharpened Senses, you get attacked once. At the start of your next turn, you have no evasion. Because all of your evasion was used up. Or sorry, because all of your evasion just went away. It was only this turn. So it's no longer that turn. You no longer have the evasion. Most of the evasion cards were buffed. As you can see, Sharpened Senses now gives evasion 3 this turn. Previously, it was only 1 evasion and 1 wits. But in exchange, it is only evasion this turn. Fatigue. So this one, a lot of words. Previously, fatigue is the mechanic where cards cost more if you draw enough cards in 1 turn. Previously, it was just 6 cards for every stack of fatigue, but now it's 6 cards for the first stack, but the second stack is only 5 cards, and that goes down to 4 and then 3, and then it will stay at 3 for all future ranks of fatigue you gain. This means that you will very, very quickly, when playing draw-heavy decks, hit that fatigue threshold where you cannot play any more cards. It's much, much harder to go very deep on fatigue because even decks that are able to manage, 3 or 4 stacks of fatigue previously are going to really struggle when they find themselves at 7 and 8 stacks when previously they would have not been anywhere near that high. So that said, minimum threshold per rank of fatigue is still 3, even if your initial fatigue threshold is reduced because you were wearing, say, the Arcane Belt. That is the -1 spell cost, but -1 fatigue threshold. It is worth noting, of course, that this reduced threshold is very important to be aware of when you are fighting things with Fortify or Opportunist. Make sure that you count wisely, and the new UI does have a handy-dandy counter tracker that you can see that will help you make sure that you don't get got by that. Other mechanic changes. Frozen. This one's fairly minor. Basically, once an enemy becomes frozen, applying more frost to them is harder. Additional frost is reduced by half. That includes fixed things like frost rune or frostbite. You have an enemy that gets hit by an ice blast, so now it's frozen. You hit it with a frost strike, which hits once and gives frost rune. That would have been 2 frost. That's halved, and now it's 1. And this effect where it halves the amount of frost received, that is also applied after all other modifiers. So it doesn't matter if you have, adept and the enemy is vulnerable. That would be like plus 60% status. It's not minus 50% status. It's whatever the number is after all the other modifiers, after powerful, after buffs, after the enemy's debuffs, half. So that makes chain freezing a bit harder. Frost is still very good, of course, but it's going to be a lot harder to just bury your opponents in frost like you could on the current patch, on the previous patch, I guess. So plated. Plated can now be removed by flailing against it. More specifically, if you hit an enemy with plated and your attack hits for 0 damage or applies 0 status, then after that card is done resolving its effect, the enemy will lose 1 rank of plated. If an enemy attacks you and they hit you for 0 damage, evades don't count for this. If you evade or the enemy evades, that won't remove a stack of plated. But if you actually get hit for 0 damage, then after that enemy's turn, you will lose a rank of plated. it is possible to lose multiple ranks of plated if there are multiple enemies that are hitting you and they're still hitting you for 0. But once you've lost enough plated for them to do even 1 damage to you, you won't lose any more plated because enemies only attack for the same fixed number each time. Or rather, any single multi-hit from an enemy is all going to be multiplied to the same number. So it'll either all be 0s or it won't be usually. So another note here is that only one rank is removed per card or enemy turn, regardless of how many hits are reduced to 0. So you play Stinging Strike, it hits for 0x4, and you remove 1 rank of plated. Temporary plated ranks are lost before non-temporary ranks. So if you play Stone Skin, which gives you plated 2 this turn, if you had already plated from something else like a Dragon Form, you don't have to worry. Your Dragon Form plated will not be at risk unless you lose both of your Stone Skin plated and then you still get hit for 0 by a third enemy. You will be, if only 2 enemies hit you, you'll only lose the 2 temporary plated ranks from Stone Skin. And again, this is only if you get hit for 0. Get hit by 1, plated doesn't change. So let's talk about enemy changes. Emerald Dragon is now weaker. So Emerald Dragon now creates fewer shock spasms, both when its attack adds shock spasms and when it reaches 40% health. And as we just discussed with the plated changes, its plated can now be removed. This makes it quite a bit easier to deal with if you are playing a deck that was previously hitting a point where you were struggling against its plated. Often, now what will happen is you can hit it for 0 using your weakest attacks to chip away the plated, and then because you probably have a mix of things that hit hard and things that don't hit as hard, you will be able to keep playing your weakest cards to keep chipping away the plated, and your big cards will still be able to do good amounts of damage. So that makes Emerald Dragon a bit easier to manage. Giant Loreblossoms, though, are stronger. They're not the only ones that are stronger. We'll get to that. But Giant Loreblossoms now start with 3 ranks of Death Spores. Before they started with only 2. And they are now more likely to attack as more of them die. What this means is, previously what would happen often with Giant Loreblossoms is you would kill the first 2, and then the last 2 would just faff about buffing each other or debuffing you instead of, trying to kill you. That's no longer going to happen. The Giant Loreblossoms, once they're down to only 1 or 2 of them, are going to become a lot more aggressive. They are much, much more likely to be attacking or applying Arcane to you. So once you've gotten them down to only 1 or 2 left, you want to close out that fight very quickly, which is already true, but now it's even more punishing if you don't. Other enemy changes. Turn 0 moves. Some enemies will now act immediately as the fight starts before you get to do anything. So 2 of them, Vessel of Blight and Shadowbone Elemental, are going to apply debuffs to you. So you will start the fight with 80 Leech against Vessel of Blight. You can no longer freeze it out of doing that to you. You can no longer gain Purity on turn 1 in order to prevent that from happening. You are eating that Leech, and you are just going to have to live with it. Likewise, Shadowbone Elemental, 2 Curse right up front. For both of these, if you do have Pure Coast Crystal, which is the trinket that gives you 2 starting ranks of Purity, that will show up in time to block the debuff, but otherwise you are just out of luck. You're just going to have to find some way to manage it. Demented Mushroom now immediately gives itself and its minions 30 shield and 4 death spores each. This means that the fight is now substantially harder because you can no longer get easy, squishy pick-off kills on the first Munchroom before on 1 or both Munchrooms before they set up shield. It's also worth noting that used to only be 20 shield, I believe. It is now 30 shield, so it's even more shield. So there's a lot more health in that fight now, and that fight is now much more likely to kill you. I would say Demented Mushroom it was already a pretty difficult fight. It is now much harder, easily the hardest boss fight in Area 1 for Depth 3. Prepare for it if you see it. Cleanse, absolutely you need all the cleanse you can get, and you need to be able to try and chew through it quickly, because if you don't, you're going to die. The other note is, because it doesn't spend that first turn shielding and death sporsing, you're going to have to deal with even more incoming poison on turn 1, because the Munchroom is going to get straight down to business and not spend any time setting up. So that's the turn 0 moves. That's what you need to know about that. Some other enemies in Depth 3 got buffs. Yep. If you were struggling with Depth 3 before, you are going to have a bad day with this patch. Depth 3 is now quite a bit harder. In addition to the new enemies, which up the difficulty somewhat, I talked about the Opportunist buff that the Prowler now gets. Shadowbone Scout and Shadowbone Hunter are now going to hit harder with all their attacks. They just straight up got a buff to their hits. And Martial Elemental, its attacks didn't change, except when it buffs itself, it now gets 4 powerful instead of 2, which means that it is going to scale up a lot faster. And where before Martial Elementals were often not much of a threat, you will very quickly get used to seeing like 12x 4 hits coming out of Martial Elemental. So be prepared for that, especially in the fight that they have with the Shadowbone Protector, where the Shadowbone Protector will give them death spores. Yeah, so I will have guides out hopefully soon on how to play characters. Stay tuned if you're struggling with Depth 3, because hoo boy, your day's not getting better. All right, so some other changes. We have some new default decks. The starting decks for all of the characters have changed. Part of this is because there are a few new cards that were unlocked by default. And these cards, these deck changes are also going to affect players playing Quick Play, because your Quick Play starting deck is based on the character's default deck. This also will affect the card pool for the starting decks, which won't affect Quick Play. And if you have already bought a character, you will still have the default deck that they had before this patch. But if you delete all your decks for a character and then create a deck, it will create it as the default deck. So if you have a character that is very low level and you just want to see what the default deck looks like, that's how you can do that. Also, I have this written as dozens of cards because I wasn't sure how many when I made this, but the answer is something like 158 cards were changed. Some of those are just wording tweaks to be consistent, but a lot of them are buffs. There are a few nerfs, but a lot of the changes are buffs. I will have like I mentioned earlier, I'll have a separate video out in the near future that goes over the changes in more detail, because there's a lot of cards that changed and it's going to take a lot of time to talk about. Other changes, XP gain changes. So on the last patch, grinding depth 1 was the fastest way to level. I had a couple of videos about that. And in order to fix that, because really playing depth 1 isn't very exciting, so having that be the best way to level, it was not great. So now depth 1 XP is reduced, depth 2 XP has been slightly increased, and depth 3 XP has been increased. So playing depth 3 or depth 2, which is probably what you were doing if you were playing normally, that's now more rewarding, which is great. And also the XP you need to get to levels 2, 3, and 4 has been reduced, because those levels were supposed to be hit with depth 1, theoretically. And so with depth 1 giving out less XP, those levels now need less XP. So overall, this is going to be a net positive for the majority of players. You spend less time at the very, very low levels. You're going to get to your second passive a lot faster. And if you're playing at depth 3, you are just going to get that little bit of extra nudge towards getting your levels up as quick as possible. And so that is all of my notes that I have to talk about here, but that is far from everything. If you want to get the full details on all of the changes, including if you just want to be able to read through all of what changed with cards, read the official patch notes, and there will be a link in the description of this video that you can click in order to see that. All right, so that is going to be it for this video. I hope this was informative. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment. I will try and get back to you on that one. Or you can join the official Breach Wanderers Discord, and there will be a link to that in the description as well, where you can chat with the dev or other players in the community, and you can get all your questions answered. So yeah, I will see you guys next time. Toodles.